Sadly, as millions of Americans are struggling, trying to figure out how we're going to survive through this pandemic, the unemployment situation, people having to deal with their new life, possibly taking care of children and things like that. It looks like there's not going to be any real relief coming from the federal government because once again we have um, a new a new bill out, a new attempted bill to kind of get some hands into or get some cash into Americans' hands, and it's just not looking good. So, starting off, 26% of Americans have taken advantage of some type of deferral program. Whether that be through your mortgage company, through utilities companies. When the pandemic initially hit, everyone started offering some type of assistance. In many cases, that was because the federal government did step up. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. They offered something. They offered people something. They offered companies something to get them moving, and that allowed them to have a little bit of relief so they can pass it on to consumers, to just regular Americans. Well, here we are as we get closer to the election. It's becoming increasingly clear that this is just becoming more and more politicized, and I don't really think that there's going to be any additional relief coming through anytime soon. There is a huge impasse with the amount of funds that the Democrats and the Republicans are seeking. And it seems like, well, it's rather clear that the Democrats are offering no victories. They're not looking to do anything that's going to make Donald Trump look good as we get closer to the election. We have a debate in, 10 days or so? No, 15 days or so. So they don't want to talk about anything that's going to make Trump look good. And they're making it hard, man. But let's talk about this new bill. So the Senate just this is a beautiful thing because it's bipartisan, but a bipartisan caucus. They unveiled a $1.5 trillion proposal, and here's how it breaks down. $120 billion will be allocated for unemployment assistance, with workers getting an extra $450 a week for 8 weeks starting in mid-October. That would be followed up by $600 a week, not to exceed 100% of a person's previous wage through January 2021. That obviously is a huge deal because that was one of the issues, or some people thought were issues of the prior stimulus bill. It gave many Americans who weren't making $600 a week more than they were making, so in their minds, why would people go back to work because they're going to make all this extra money? And ironically, you see President Trump going up and saying, "Oh, look, we had the highest rate of spending ever in," I think you said it was July, because people had extra money despite there being a pandemic. So people look for the benefits of the exact same proposals when they work out for their favor, and when they don't, then they just trash them based on the exact same logic. The second round of stimulus checks, a proposal popular among both parties, is also included in the bipartisan plan. Under the proposal, a second wave of payments up to $1,200 will go to individuals, plus an additional $500 for any dependent. Not bad. The problem underlying the stalemate is in the lack of centrist proposals. Sarah Binder, professor of political science at George Washington University and senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, told Yahoo Money, the dilemma is that both parties have to feel the electoral heat from refusing to go back to the bargaining table. Yeah, you might not be able to take another vacation. The plan passed in May, the HEROES Act, was initially worth $3 trillion, but was later cut down to 2.2. By contrast to the latest Republican plan, rejected in the Senate last week by the Democrats, was worth around $300 billion. So that particular plan, it was defeated 52-47. It needed 60 to move on, but the Democrats said it wasn't adequate, and I guess I kind of have to agree that it really wasn't adequate. But given that people need some type of relief, it's tough because something is better than nothing, and sadly, this is the state we're in. Why should we even have to beg to get relief for the average American? But that's the society that we have. The Republican proposal was dubbed the Delivering Immediate Relief of American Families, Schools, and Small Business Act, including additional unemployment benefits for out-of-work Americans, funding for schools, liability protections for business, and healthcare facilities. Of course, it was never likely to pass, but it's just crazy where we are, because Republicans originally were backing a $1 trillion bill, while the Democrats are fighting over $3 trillion. So this is just a huge Like what is that? That's a huge chasm between these two. And again, it just seems more and more likely that nothing is going to pass at all. So if you're looking forward to a new check, another stimulus, I really wouldn't hold your breath. I don't think it's going to happen, or at least not until November. And, based on what the president's saying, maybe we're going to have our vaccine or something will be happening where there won't be a need for an additional stimulus. And we're just going to kind of deal with the repercussions of the economic fallout as it is. In the bill that failed, there was a $300 weekly unemployment benefit reduced from the $600 that expired in July. That would run through December 27th. Liability protections for businesses, hospitals, churches, and schools against some related personal injuries from the virus. And this is probably why the Democrats said this bill was inadequate. Businesses will have to have less than 300 employees and show at least a 35% revenue reduction compared with last year. So provisions like that obviously are just going to make it more difficult for people to, or for businesses to be able to take advantage of such programs. A $10 billion bill to the post office would be forgiven and thus turned into a grant. The post office would be required to offer a report to Congress on how the virus has increased expenses. And then, this is actually good, $105 billion through Education Stabilization Fund for schools as students go back to class across the country. The bill includes a 2-year tax credit for private schools and other scholarship granting organizations. And then $16 billion for testing, $31 billion for development of vaccine therapeutics. So we're all over the place right now. Clearly, I just don't think we're moving forward. And like I said, I just want to remember this, because what's happening is the American people are political pawns at this point. They're going to say, hey, we tried to get this to go through, but the Democrats wouldn't let it go through. And then other guys are going to say, well, we tried to do this, but then the Republicans wouldn't let it go through. But what's most clear is that they don't care. If it's not going to amount to votes, if they don't get to put their name on it, if they don't get to put their stamp on it, nothing will change. Americans will suffer, and they're okay with that, because this is all about political points, and you don't get any for giving a victory to the other side. And that's the sad state of all of this. You know what I mean? Here we are in a situation where Americans are tapping into their savings. They're just faced with uncertainty. Some people are losing jobs. We're going to have this huge disparity between those people who are able to, say work from home versus those who can't. People who are able to, and I'm seeing it. You look at the children who have to go to school, or those who can't go to school, and how their home situation has so much more of a huge impact on their lives, and that's something that schools can't control. And if children aren't able to go to school, then millions of kids are just going to fall through the cracks, and it's sad, and no one seems to care. Like, no one seems to care unless it's going to benefit. If they can get a victory off of it, then they'll care. But because they won't, because they can't get a victory off of it by giving in to the other side, then we sit here stuck in gridlock. But Trump did actually, he did push for, he made some provisions, I think it was August. He stepped up, I give the man credit. He stepped up. He tried to get relief for renters. He said 40 million renters that should be eligible for that. Of course, there's questions on the legality of the measures that he pushed for. Also, let me get, because I like to cite my sources. I like the numbers. Trump also said he was expanding unemployment to an additional additional $400, 300 of which would be guaranteed by the federal government. The other 100 would have to come from the states. And of course, the other thing that we're seeing through this whole thing is that because the states are so they're so much bureaucracy, so convoluted, they're so inefficient, they haven't been able to quickly disperse these funds, and it's just been a mess all over the place. And that's another thing that we're seeing. And, when we would talk about better ways to do things, Yang was talking about getting rid of all these different offices and restructuring things. And perhaps, why should we have a means-tested program? Because when you have means-tested programs, it increases the amount of hands that dollars have to pass through and there has to be additional bureaucracy. It makes it harder to simply get money to the hands of Americans. And that's what we're seeing. When you look at unemployment initially, in some states, they were able to get the funds out quickly, but in most states, it was pretty slow. There was a lack of direction. People or the states' governments didn't really know how to do it, what to do. There were issues with their systems. There were issues being able to actually, meet up with representatives to the unemployment office because in some cases there were different programs. And it's out of control, and I'm hoping that going forward, another one of the lessons that we learned from this is that we simply have to change the way that we do things like this. We need a more efficient way to be able to get money to Americans' hands, because when there is a situation when we need to give money to people, it's dire need. We don't have time to figure it out. And even though Trump did make that provision, even though he did do that executive order, guess what? Most people aren't seeing anything because states don't know what to do or how to do it. And as we get closer and closer to the election, again, this is just going to come back to political points. And that doesn't really help anybody unless you're the person who's trying to win a seat, or someone who's running for some office. Other than that, everyone else is a loser. Oh, except for corporations. Corporations are good, but most Americans lose, sadly. And I just want to remind you that at the end of the day, none of these parties care about you. They only care about your vote and how they can use you to expand their political legacy. So these Democrats, hey, it's all of them. It's the Democrats, it's the Republicans. I'm not gonna blame this on one party, but no, especially I will definitely say that Democrats are probably way more responsible right now. But the impasse is too large. I mean, we're talking about, you propose a $300 billion bill, and the Democrats propose $3 trillion. Like, that's huge. We're not moving off of that. So you clearly are proposing legislation just so you can say that the other side won't agree with us. Therefore, we can't get this money to you, and you're going to keep hearing the statements. But even though that statement you might think is a great soundbite, no one cares. All it looks like is you didn't come through for me. And I think it's a lot better message to say to Americans, hey, look, this is what we could do. Even though we couldn't do what we wanted to do, this is what we were able to do together. But again, it just doesn't seem like anyone is really interested in that. It's sad, but that's where we are, man. So just so you know, don't get your hopes up. Money's probably not coming. And if it does, just know there probably could have been more. But we're not trying to help people out like that. So